What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Take the North podcast presented by Odyssey. I am Dan Wiederer with a very special episode today. We have a spotlight game Sunday in Baltimore, Bears and Ravens. I am pleased to be joined by my colleague at The Athletic, Jeff Zrebiec. Jeff covers the Ravens for The Athletic. Jeff, how's it going, man?
Good, Dan. Always good talking to you. How are you doing?
It's a fascinating week here in
Yeah.
Chicago, and I'm sure by extension, very fascinating in Baltimore as well. I know that when the season started, absolutely no one in the NFL orbit thought that this would be a game featuring the 4-2 Bears and the 1-5 Ravens, and yet here we are. I know you've come off the bye. I guess first and foremost, what'd you do with the spare time that you had last week at the early October bye?
Yeah, John Harbaugh kept the players in the building as long as humanly possible. I think as long as the rules allow. So they had availability through Wednesday, and then had a couple days, which was nice. Took the kids to Great Wolf Lodge. I don't know if they have some of those in your area. So we had not been there. There's one newer one about an hour away. So we went there, and I was on a slide, Dan, or I was getting ready to board one of these or get on one of these slides. And some random guy taps me on the shoulder and starts asking me about the Raven struggles. So I couldn't get away with it even if I tried.
He got on the inner tube with you too, right? Just to get some more answers on the way down.
He at least let me go on there with my kid and his friend, and didn't bother me then. But I, of course, saw him 5 more times during our, as you know, at those places. There's not very far you can go. So
during a one-on-one with Ben Johnson that I had late in the summer, he had an epic Great Wolf Lodge rant. He had taken his kids there as part of his last hurrah of summer little fling, and didn't quite enjoy the experience as much as people told him he might. And so I'm sure you can relate to some extent.
Yeah, Dan, with kids, like it's not about your enjoyment, and
Exactly.
I knew I wouldn't enjoy it because I don't tolerate a whole lot when it comes to nonsense, and there's plenty of nonsense when you get in the Great Wolf Lodge. But actually, we only stayed for about 30 hours, which is the right time frame. Anything more, there probably would have been, okay, I've had enough of this. But hey, the kids had fun, so that's what counts.
That was Ben's direct quote. He said, "Hey, the kids had fun."
Yep.
that was the exact sentiment. He had some other things to share, but we'll keep those on the down low for now. I want to get into the big picture look at the Ravens shortly, but I think the small picture look right now in this moment is the status of Lamar Jackson. And you and I were exchanging texts on Monday. The Ravens got back on the practice field Monday, and Lamar was not there. What is your understanding? What is your interpretation? What is your expectation as we go into this week?
Yeah, that was a little bit of a disappointment, I know. I think the expectation was when they got back on the practice field this week, he would be on it. By all accounts, he had a good bye week. He's continually made progress. There was no guarantees from the beginning that he would play in this game, that he would come back and be immediately ready. I mean, we're talking about I don't want to say a significant hamstring injury, but even moderately significant hamstring injury is a 3-4 week kind of deal. And Sunday would be 3 weeks since he hurt it. So it wouldn't be crazy if he's not out there, but given the struggles they had and the much needed bye, they were sort of looking forward to coming back from the bye and having their star player on the field, and that he wasn't able to make it. Was a disappointment to a lot of people. I think they'll try again Wednesday, and there's still hope that he'll be ready to go Wednesday. My understanding is there hasn't been a setback. It's just been, as with hamstring injuries, sometimes the recovery is slower than you hope. And it's about Lamar Jackson being comfortable, feeling like he can move around like he usually does, and not being an injury risk. So if he's not on the field Wednesday, Dan, I think it's time to press the panic button. He's missed a lot of time now, and you need more than 1 or 2 practices, I would think, given all the time he's missed. So Wednesday's the key day there. If he's
Wednesday
not there,
seems like
go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say Wednesday seems like it will be the telling day for that situation, and whether they would need to pivot. It's fascinating from this end because it does feel like this is sort of a now or never moment for the Ravens, and so there is almost like that pressure to play, because if you don't, the season goes down the drain. Do you feel like that factors in a little bit this week as they try to figure out that decision?
Yeah, this is this team's last stand. It's hard to say anything but. Now they play the Dolphins Thursday Night Football 4 days later, and any chance the Ravens get back in this thing, and only 4 teams in the modern era have made the playoffs after a 1-5 start. So any chance they get back in this thing has to include 2 wins in 5 days, and they need him on the field. The Bears are a good team. We know that. Are the Ravens capable of winning without Lamar? Yeah, but they've rarely done it. I think they're 4-12 when he hasn't played. Tyler Huntley is a guy that beat the Bears once in Chicago, but this is a different Bears team we're talking about. So if they don't have Lamar Jackson and they lose Sunday, 1-6, you're pretty much done. You're playing out the string. And if he can't play Sunday, who's to say he can play the following Thursday either?
Sure.
It's because it's such a quick turnaround. So yeah, absolutely. If he's not on the field Wednesday, it's time to panic in Baltimore, I would say, when it comes to his status.
Am I correct that in the 2+ games that he has missed here with this hamstring issue, the Ravens have scored only 1 touchdown?
Yes, that's accurate. And they were in games that he's played and finished, they're over 30+ points in every one of them. And they signed Cooper Rush thinking, look, anybody knows if Lamar Jackson misses a long period of time, they're sunk. That was the reality of it. But they signed Cooper Rush because they felt like, if he had to play for 2 or 3 weeks for a short-term injury for Jackson, he'd be able to win games and they'd be able to win games. But he's really struggled, and it's to the point now where it would not surprise me if Lamar Jackson can't go if Tyler Huntley's the starting quarterback on Sunday. It just doesn't seem like the team is gelled with Cooper Rush. He's struggled. And Huntley, with at least his athleticism and legs, allows you to do a little more than maybe Cooper Rush does. And Cooper Rush has turned the ball over. I think he has 5 turnovers in 2 games now.
Lamar Jackson's hamstring is just one of many injuries that have kind of set the Ravens back in this really stunning 1-5 start to the season. What's the health looking like coming out of the bye? I know there's some expectation that some guys, including one guy we're very familiar with here in Chicago, Roquan Smith, will be back out there. What's the health watch there with the whole team?
Yeah, they were on the practice field Monday, and the only 2 guys that weren't on it were Lamar Jackson and outside linebacker Tavius Robinson. Robinson fractured his foot. He will not be playing in this game. He'll be put on IR at some point in the coming days. And that's a little bit of a blow because they're so thin at outside linebacker. They traded Odafe Owe last week. So now they lost another guy who's playing about 70% of their snaps and had a couple sacks. So that's a really vulnerable group right now at outside linebacker. The big injury this year beyond Lamar is losing Nnamdi Madubuike, one of the best interior defensive linemen. They have not recovered. He's a good interior pass rusher, but he stops the run, and they haven't been able to do either. And the bigger concern with him is he has a neck injury, and they have not shot down the idea that this could create some career uncertainty, never mind season uncertainty. So that's the tough one. But other than that, everyone on the 53-man roster, other than, Lamar Jackson, Tavius Robinson, should probably be ready to go. They get back fullback Pat Ricard. In a lot of cities, that's not a big deal. But when you run as much as the Ravens and you've struggled in short yardage, Ricard's probably the best lead blocker in the NFL. So getting him back should help. He hasn't played this year yet because of a calf injury. Roquan Smith said he'll play yesterday. This is a big game for him, obviously, but I think he recognizes the urgency to get back on the field with their season slipping away. So you'll get those guys back. Awuzie, a veteran corner, should be ready to go. They're pretty healthy beyond, the big question mark of Lamar Jackson, the couple guys who are on IR already.
I'm going to keep you on the Ricard topic for a minute because I've had multiple people around the league talk to me about how much of an X factor he is in an offense that has so many other headliners. And so from your on the ground perspective, what is that makes him special? Obviously a multi-time Pro Bowler and a guy that gives that ground game some teeth.
Yeah, just the versatility. They're comfortable, Dan, with having him on the edge, a man blocking top outside linebackers. I mean, that's how much they trust his blocking. He allows them to be a little more versatile with their scheme. I mean, he can do different things. He can line up as an H-back. He can line up as the fullback right in front of Derrick Henry, which is a lot of beef there coming at you. He can line up as a tight end. He's got pretty good hands. He just allows them the versatility and just, any Ravens team that you probably remember, most teams that you've guys covered, and what's synonymous with the Ravens is the physicality and that toughness. quite frankly, you talk to other coaches around the league, and they'll talk about how the Ravens look like a soft team this year. And players hate hearing that, but
Yeah.
Ricard brings that edge, and he brings that physicality, and he mixes it up, and he finishes blocks, and they feel comfortable. I mean, you kind of follow Ricard and their offense and their run game and what they're going to do. And you talk to coaches from the teams they play, and they've all said, man, do they miss Patrick Ricard.
So this is a loaded question, and it's very open-ended by design. But if hypothetically you were in the line for a water slide at Great Wolf Lodge, and somebody said, "How the hell did the Ravens get to 1-5?" What would you tell them? What is the reason for this start?
Yeah, like every team has injuries, and what you see every Sunday is teams have figured it out. The Lions didn't have their entire secondary last night, and they figured out a way to win. We've seen the 49ers figure out a way to win, and they've been hit harder by injuries than the Ravens. You see it every week. Teams find a way. The Ravens, quite frankly, haven't found a way. So the injury excuse only flies so much, Dan. One, I think this roster was overrated from the beginning. And I say that as someone who's part of overrating it. A lot of the national TV pundits had said that they have the best roster in the league. And I didn't dispute it. I wasn't necessarily all in, but I felt comfortable saying it is absolutely one of the best. I didn't see any clear holes. There were depth concerns, but in the salary cap era, everybody has depth concerns at a couple positions. But where they've gotten hit by some of the injuries is where some of their depth issues have been exploited. In terms of the offensive and defensive line. The offensive line has really struggled. That's been a big part of it. Some of it is left tackle Ronnie Stanley's injury, but their guard play has been really poor. And they've gone cheap at guard for a number of years. And Lamar Jackson's able to overcome some suspect offensive line play at times because his elusiveness and how they play and the offense they run kind of prevents pass rushers from sort of pinning their ears back. But everything, they've had trouble blocking. They've had trouble run game. And it's just a lot of mistakes that you just don't see. Derrick Henry suddenly having a fumbling problem. Zay Flowers having a fumbling problem. And it just hasn't felt right from the beginning. I mean, they played a great 3 quarters in Buffalo, and then they just collapsed. And it just seems like they have not recovered from that. And there's so much on the line this year. It was a win or else season. A lot of people were labeling it. You had veterans coming in here for a shot at the Super Bowl, 1-year kind of guys like DeAndre Hopkins and other guys they have. And it just seems like they haven't recovered. There's a ton of pressure on them, and it just seems like they just haven't bounced back from that early disappointment. And it's weird because even yesterday, players seem to be at a loss still. They still seem to be shell-shocked and confused about how this has gone so horribly wrong.
So the Ravens were my pick to win the AFC. I think they might have been my pick to win the Super Bowl this year. And so I come at this with sort of surprised eyes, obviously. And I woke up Monday morning believing that, look, like this is a team that had faced a really tough schedule in the first month and a half of the season. They had a bunch of injuries. They're going to be motivated more than ever on Sunday to play the Bears team as their schedule softens a little bit. But the more I've talked to people around the league, the more I've listened to you, I'm curious whether this feels like that moment, like in the Looney Tunes, where Wile E. Coyote's already off the cliff, but he hasn't started his free fall yet. Do you fear that that's where they're at in the season, where they're just one mistake away from that doubt taking them down?
100%, Dan. I mean, it just seems like they're that boxer right now with a weak chin, and they're just. Okay. And can they pull themselves off the mat? Last Sunday or before the bye when they played the Rams, we saw some defensive improvements. The defense actually looked like they're playing with a better level of physicality. They're not doing, they're playing better. They weren't getting pushed around up front like we've seen. So that was a building block, but the offense was so dreadful now. And it's just, before the injuries, they weren't even playing that well. They had a couple quarter like that. You watch part of that Buffalo game week 1, you're like, wow, this team could be a juggernaut. But then they just fell apart, and they just haven't really put together a team-wide, full-team effort all year. So, yeah, it's definitely a team that I think is searching for answers. And when you have that expectations and you're 1-5, the pressure becomes immense, and it's hard to keep the locker room together. And guys start making business decisions. So they're not there yet. but we also haven't seen a response. We also haven't seen a pushback. And I think any sense of this team can salvage their season comes with number 8 on the field. And when you come back from a bye week, you're looking forward to this stretch. You feel like you can save the season, and then your quarterback's not on the practice field. The optimism goes away pretty quickly. So this will be interesting to see how they respond, and whether they're able to get off the mat this week. Because at times this season, this team has looked like a beaten team that has very little confidence and hasn't offered a ton of pushback.
This is why I don't file my predictions on Mondays, because I'm starting to have different thoughts about this game here. And you and I are in bizarro world, because you're used to covering the team that's, in the playoff chase year after year after year. I'm getting ready for coaching searches every 3 to 4 years. And now the Bears have gone more than a month since losing. The locker room is as light as we've remembered it in about 6 or 7 years here. And it's just a different world. Todd Monkin was a guy that interviewed for the Bears head coaching position in January. And I think there was a sense that he was a very popular candidate here in Chicago in the event that the Bears didn't get their number 1 choice, who of course was Ben Johnson. What do you make of his fingerprints on either the early struggles or what he can do to be part of the solution as they go forward here?
Yeah, I think Todd Monkin has done an awesome job here. They've had one of the best offenses in the league. They had probably the best offense last year. Hasn't had a good year. He's not alone. But certainly what's been interesting is you listen to locker room, and there seems to be a whole lot of defending the defensive coordinator, Zach Orr, who's really struggled. And you haven't heard much about Monkin. Like, I'm not saying he's lost the players or whatever, but I just think when you have a bunch of wide receivers who want the ball and aren't getting it, people start grumbling, right? And I think we're kind of at that stage. But Todd Monkin is not among the Ravens' problems, regardless of what you read. I don't think he's had a very good year. I think he'd be the first to admit that. I think he's a fascinating personality. He's upbeat, and I mean, the cusses fly every other word. I think we talked during your coaching search, and I said you'd have a lot of fun covering him, because he'd be, and obviously he's a local guy, I guess, for you guys too, right? So he's had a little bit of a tough year, and he has to figure this out. But it's hard to do sometimes when your offensive line is struggling and your quarterback's not on the field. So Todd Monkin deserves some grace. He's had a hell of a run as an offensive coordinator. If stuff continues to go bad, maybe he's not here next year, but he's having no problem getting a job elsewhere. I think he's one of the better offensive coordinators in the NFL, and I think he's done an awesome job here. And he needs, like the rest of the coaching staff, he needs to figure out a way to reverse the slide and put some points up on the board, even if Lamar Jackson's not on the field.
Yeah, as I'm piecing together the coaching search puzzle back in the winter, you watch the Detroit offense, you watch the Ravens offense from last year, and you're like, this is as entertaining as anything I've watched in my entire life as a football fan, much less as an NFL reporter. I think the Ravens were over 7,000 yards, I think, with more than 3,000 yards rushing last year, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, DVOA, and that's why there's the Baltimore Sun did a story here this week about kind of some of the issues of that downfall, and there's some critical anonymous quotes on Monkin, and regardless, I sense the frustration too when you have a bunch of veteran receivers who want the ball and are not getting it, specifically if a couple of them are on contract years or whatever. You're going to see some grumbling, and there's going to and Lamar's a guy who's unanimously loved in the locker room. Nobody's pointing fingers at him. And unfortunately, Monkin, sometimes when the offense is not producing, the offensive coordinator is the guy that always gets the blame. But he can take it. He's been accountable from day one. He's the first to say he needs to do a better job. But this offense is, as long as the quarterback's on the field, I don't think it'll take much to get this offense back on track.
It sounds to me as if the defense has been a little bit more vulnerable, I guess would be a good word for it. The secondary particularly hasn't played very well. What do you make of that group? Caleb Williams coming off a really rough outing against the Saints, win on Sunday. But how does that sort of pair up here in this matchup on Sunday?
Yeah, the defense is, I mean, look, I don't think I'm overstating it. It's been a disaster. I mean, they've had one of the very worst defenses in the league. And, second-year defensive coordinator Zach Orr has struggled. And I think the secondary, they have a lot of assets in that group, whether it's cap space or first-round picks. But and I'm not defending that group necessarily, but when you can't get to the quarterback and you can't stop the run, your secondary, there's no secondary in the league that can constantly hold up when they're not getting pressure and the quarterback has too much time. And I think that's been a major part of their problem.
Yeah.
They just get no pressure. Like there was a stat, and I haven't updated yet, Dan. But it was as of last week. Like their outside linebackers were getting chipped less than any team in the league. I mean, these guys are not getting to the quarterback, and they're not having to devote double teams and chips, and like people aren't afraid of anybody up front of the Ravens, and that's been a killer for them, and that's kind of exposed the guys on the back end a little bit. I think one interesting thing about the defense this week, they feel like they found something before the bye. They acquired Alohi Gilman, the safety from the Chargers, and they kind of looked at that as a force multiplying move. One, he settles things on the back end a little bit. He's a veteran. He gets it. He knows the defense. The Chargers defensive coordinator is from the Ravens. Like Jesse Minter was with the Ravens. So it's not a huge adjustment. He came in from the very first practice and he was sort of taking charge. So I think they think he'll settle things down on the back end a little bit. Well, there'll be less busts and more organization and structure. But what else he did is he allowed Kyle Hamilton, who's the very best player on this defense, to move closer to the line of scrimmage. And he can help out now. He blitzes. He can help out in the run game. He can play in the slot. And he can force turnovers. He's their best defensive playmaker. And now he's up close to the line of scrimmage. Now Roquan Smith is going to be back. So I think they feel like the defensive improvements will follow. But Dan, somebody's got to win a matchup and get to the quarterback. And they just haven't found that way. And they talk all about scheming pressure. And you have to do that. But at some point, you also need to beat the guy in front of you, or you're going to have a hard time getting the quarterback.
As you were talking there, I was just checking my dates to make sure I had my memory accurate. We're coming up on the 3-year anniversary of Roquan Smith coming to Baltimore. Yeah. There was a Halloween trade.
Yeah, I remember.
I believe it probably interrupted your kids' trick-or-treating as much as it interrupted mine for a little while. But in the 2.5 seasons since Roquan's been there, obviously he's produced. I think there's people here that look back on it and say, you let a highly drafted, productive top 10 draft pick get out of your building without being able to get him to his second contract. And he's capitalized on what he's done for the Ravens. What's your assessment of, I guess, both the 2.5 years as a whole and where he stands now here in week 8 of 2025?
Yeah, it's kind of been the tale of two runs. Like in the beginning, man, was he incredibly impactful player, took the locker room and immediately became the guy in there, became the face of that defense, was great with the media, seemed to just be loving every minute of it, and was playing great football. And the defense, this is a defense that kind of won the version of the Triple Crown 2 years ago in Mike McDonald's last year here. And you don't do that without getting really good play from your middle linebacker and kind of defensive leader. It's been a struggle, though, over the last year or so. I mean, he's been banged up. Roquan's been the first to admit last year he didn't think he was in the condition he should have been in. Like his condition has been a hot button issue for Baltimore fans.
Okay.
And then that continued this week with some of the practice videos and people questioning the shape he's in. Dude plays his butt off. He's going to do that. And he's an emotional leader for this team. But he struggled a little bit. There's no question. And I think part of that is they've gone with an unproven guy next to him. Since Patrick Queen left as a free agent, I think Roquan's been hung out to dry a little bit by not having that guy next to him. And I think Roquan, and some of this is on him too, I think he's felt like he's had to do too much and hasn't just focused on, kind of his keys and his responsibilities, and they've suffered a little bit. And there's the conditioning thing, which I mentioned. So it couldn't have gone any better those first 2 years or so, Dan. But the honeymoon period has sort of ended here over the last year, and he hasn't played as well. And he's suddenly kind of one of the lightning rods for criticism among a very angry and fed up fan base.
What triggers the questions on the conditioning?
He admitted it. I mean, I just think it's kind of the eye test. People think he looks. I think it's overblown. I think it's one of these things fans kind of hold on to and gets overblown. Sure. But I don't think he was. He admitted this, so I'm not putting words here. He just wasn't in as good as conditioning he had been in the past last year. and he got banged up, and it sort of snowballed on him, which impacted his conditioning further. And now he's coming off a hamstring injury again. And, nobody questions that dude. He posts. He wants to be out there. He plays his butt off. He just hasn't been as effective. He's been, there's been teams that have sort of tried to, isolate him in the middle of the field and gone after him, which, leads to questions about his ability to cover and, gets back to the speed, conditioning, and age issues. So I think he'll be motivated this week, obviously. And I think having Kyle Hamilton kind of around, like, look, this is kind of Kyle Hamilton's defense now. Like, Roquan Smith hasn't been stripped of anything, but they just made Kyle Hamilton the highest paced safety in the league by a wide margin to be the face of this. But that doesn't mean Roquan Smith still isn't a very important piece if this defense is going to kind of fix itself and figure it out.
Fascinating subplot to Sunday for sure. With Lamar, I did want to ask a question about strategically the way that teams can have success coming after him. Obviously, the hamstring is the X factor in all this, but it did feel like I don't know if the Chiefs used some spy action against him, but it did feel like they pressured a lot and created some pressure that was hard to handle. And I'm just curious what you've seen there in terms of ways to limit his explosion.
Yeah, like pretty much the Ravens have seen it all when it comes to defending Lamar Jackson, and there's stuff that's worked for a little while. Like, again, there was a time where you just blitzed him and he struggled. But before this year, he had fixed that. And he had become deadly against the blitz. This year's been a little bit of struggle. But what we've seen lately, and I'm trying to think, the first team to really, the Lions, I think, kind of did it a lot, where they put a spy on him. And the Chiefs did it again. And we haven't seen Lamar since those two games, obviously. But the spy, it seemed to really bother him. And part of it was, Dan, I don't know that he was fully healthy. He went out officially in the Chiefs game.
Yeah.
But there have been times, like, I forgot there was one play, it was Detroit, where he scrambled and he did not outrun a linebacker that he normally would leave in the dust. And that's when the question's kind of, is he healthy? Like, what is something bothering him? So we haven't seen a fully healthy Lamar in a bit, but teams had started to really spy him and have that spy on him. And he seemed to struggle with that. But more than ever, teams are just loading the line of scrimmage on Henry and just daring the Ravens to beat him. And particularly with their backup quarterbacks on the field, they've not been able to hurt teams in the passing game. And we saw Lamar last year was able to do that a lot. We haven't seen that as much this year. They've really struggled when teams have loaded the box, and Lamar in particular, when teams have kind of kept him in and kept the spy on him, they haven't had the answers. And I mean, again, a lot of that is their offensive line has just struggled across the board.
Two last questions before I get you out of here. We're about a dozen years removed from the Bears' dismissal of Lovie Smith as their head coach, and people look back on that with a little bit of hindsight, right? And say, you fired a guy after a 10-6 season. You haven't had any success sustaining any head coaching tenure since then. Was it a mistake? At the time, there was a sense that Lovie had not achieved enough. There was a sense that Lovie's voice had worn out. John Harbaugh has been in Baltimore twice as long as Lovie was here in Chicago. Do you sense any of this where the sand in the hourglass seems to be running out and there's just not the same effect of that voice from the top of the coaching chain?
Yeah, look, there's definitely that feel here. And, you know how the vocal minority of fans are. If they had their way, Harbaugh would have been fired. Yeah, if they had their way, Harbaugh would have been fired a couple of years ago. And this kind of stems from their playoff no-shows. Like, they've been, that 1 year, 2 years ago, they had the AFC Championship on their home field, and they just no-showed against the Chiefs. We've seen them just kind of get out of their game in the playoffs too often, where they don't look like the team that they looked all regular season. And the finger's been pointed at him. Like, when you lose your identity, when you're not at your best in big games in the playoffs, the head coach blamed. But, honestly, this year, it's just sort of everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. And that's intensified the criticism. And what has been interesting this year is we haven't seen the pushback and just the fight and the physicality that Harbaugh teams in the past have played with, right? And you expected a certain brand of football from the Ravens. They preach so much about culture and all the characteristics that define them, and we haven't seen those. And that's led to the obvious questions of, look, has he lost this team, or like, what happened? Like, where is this Harbaugh style team? We haven't seen it. So no question that has intensified the questions. Has things gone stale? I think, look, even the people may disagree, but John Harbaugh is a really good football coach. The question is, you can't last forever, and this is
Right.
year 18. And would the Ravens benefit from a reset? And would Harbaugh even benefit from a reset? I'm guessing that he'll have a job before he leaves the parking lot if he's let go here. And that's fine. That's not really grounds to keep him. The owner's going to have to decide whether he still has the pulse of this team or whether they need a reset and they need things to change. And look, that's going to continue to be a question. That's not going to go away. I don't know if there's one benchmark. Like, look, if they don't make the playoffs, he's gone. That's not really how the owner works. I'm sure they'll consider all these factors. But if the team bottoms out at this point, and they're certainly circling that, what better year is there for kind of an organizational reset? It's just at some point, it's not necessarily his fault, but at some point you just need to change things up, get a new look, and you just kind of determine, look, we've gone as far as we can go with him as the head coach. And those questions are being asked now. I don't think the jury's out. I don't think we know the full answer yet, but those are legitimate questions right now as we head sort of into their second half of their bye, after their bye.
So this entire conversation has been a fascinating journey to this final little topic. And I told you, I woke up Monday morning sort of in disbelief of the 1-5 Ravens record. I picked them to win the Super Bowl, believing that everything that they had built up to this point was set to take off. I get through these last couple of days and I start to feel the anxiety from Baltimore, the sense that this isn't as rock solid as people might have believed. I walked into the week thinking, okay, this team's got the 3 H's behind them. They're at home, they're hungry, and I forgot the third H already, but
healthy,
getting healthier. Getting healthier. Yeah. And so they should be positioned to be taking care of business in this now or never moment against the Bears. I'm going to get off this podcast here and I'm going to reconsider my entire prediction. Yeah. Where are you leaning as you look at this matchup, as you consider sort of the Bears' surprise success in Ravens struggles?
In talking to people like during the bye and just in recent weeks, I sense a good bit of optimism that they feel like they can salvage this. And I think that's the attitude from the top down. There's nobody waving flags. So when you look at all the factors, healthier schedule, lighting up, getting, look, they couldn't have played a harder schedule probably through those first 5-6 weeks. And, their quarterback coming back, all that. The defensive changes they've already made and the trade they made to get in a safety that kind of changes things a little bit. I was thinking that they're going to get back in the mix. Now, I have questions about their long-term viability as contenders, right? How can you not?
Sure.
But I just did not see them just completely going in the tank and not being even relevant in the playoff mix by week 8 or 9. But yesterday, those vibes, the positive vibes that I had during the bye about, hey, they could figure this out. I think there's a lot of confidence around team, kind of a little evaporated. Part of it was Lamar Jackson not being on the practice field. They don't stand a chance without him. The other part of it is just, you hear some of the answers. Marlon Humphrey gave kind of a news conference. He doesn't talk a whole lot, but he's usually, when he talks, it's worth listening to. And he sounded down, like he's still, like we still don't have the answers. They still look to me like a team that was, maybe they're feeling a little bit better mentally and physically, obviously, because the break, they got a little reset, but it still seemed to be a team who's searching a little, that just isn't sure of itself right now. And if there's no Lamar, I don't think they beat Chicago on Sunday. That's the bad, or even if there's a limited Lamar, because he covers for so much. I will say, though, Dan, and this isn't drinking the Kool-Aid, this team, I just think this team needs a moment, and they could go on a run. They're too talented, and they do have flaws that I think will result if they do get on a run from not going very far in the postseason. But they're too talented to completely go in the tank if they're healthy and they got their guys back. So it'll be interesting. I think so much of it lies on. If you're asking me now, I'd probably pick the Bears. But if Lamar is back at practice Wednesday, if he's a full participant from week's end, and all these guys that they got back at practice this week look like they had no setbacks, are ready to go, I'd probably say it's the Ravens. But I'm hedging big time because I didn't like who I didn't see, and I didn't like some of what I heard in the locker room Monday.
You're going to develop a significant following from the Take the North audience by giving the Bears fans hopes for the rest of this week. So get ready to get followed on social media.
I had a fan reach out to me from Chicago. I forgot his handle, and he just said to me, like, "Look, are the Bears are even a worry to the Ravens at this point?" And I'm like, "Everything's a worry to this Ravens team. Everything, Bears included. They're playing really well. I mean, Dan, this is a Ravens team that got, like, 3 weeks ago, got beat 44-17 to the Houston Texans. I mean, and that Texans team that I watched last night is bad. That's not a good football team.
Yeah.
And they made CJ Stroud look like Patrick Mahomes, and Stroud, is a good young quarterback, but he's struggling. And like, this team has played as bad as anyone during this stretch. So, I mean, I think people loved, you want to give the Ravens the benefit of the doubt because we've seen it before.
Yeah.
But at some point, you are what you see every week. And we haven't seen much good in a long time from this team. And they haven't kind of played a good game since maybe the first half in Detroit. And that was all the way back in week 3, I think it was. So, they have to figure out a way because it's certainly slipping away from them fast. And it's going to be hard to have much optimism until the quarterback is back on the field and shows that he's healthy.
Man, I'm in a different place mentally than I was 36 hours ago with this matchup. And I guess the next part is you're going to put your eyes on that practice field on Wednesday. We're going to put our eyes on the injury report email, and then we'll recalibrate from there when we see what happens with Lamar.
Sounds good, Dan. It's been great talking to you. I look forward to seeing you this weekend.
Absolutely, Jeff. Always a great conversation. That's Jeff Zrebiec of The Athletic. I'm Dan Wiederer of The Athletic. This has been another episode of Take the North. Remember to like, subscribe, follow. Great talk. See you out there.